This is an introduction to the kingship and government of ancient Egypt, just to give you some basics. So at the top of the tree is the king. Now, the term king and pharaoh were foreign words used by foreigners to describe the leaders of Egypt. The leaders of Egypt were known within their country as Horus, His Majesty the Horus. That was his first name. His first name was Horus. That made him a living god. So you can understand why they built such magnificent monuments for their Horus, for their king, for their pharaoh, because they believed that they were building for a living god. Horus, the king, as I will call him from now on, the king, was the go-between heaven and earth. He was the overseer and the protector of the people according to the myth of Osiris, which I will do in another separate video. He had many names. Right at the beginning, the first king, which we think was King Nama, or also known possibly as Aha, took the name Horus. He was buying into the myth of Osiris, and by taking the name Horus, it gave him the legal right to rule Egypt. So the first name is Horus. The second name is the Neb-Tawi, the Lord of Two Lands. Now this is really the king's proper name, the one that everyone called him His Majesty, the Neb-Tawi, the Lord of Upper and Lower Egypt. So they recognise that Upper Egypt, with its thin Nile Valley, sand on both sides, black mud coming with the flood every year, and the Delta area, which was very marshy, were two different lands. Once, a long time ago, they were ruled by two different powerful families. And I'll get on to union and that sort of thing in a different video. His third name was the Golden Horus, he who shines. The Egyptians believed that their gods had flesh made out of gold. So the king in life would have had golden flesh. Well, obviously he didn't, but the people of Egypt didn't know that. These kings lived in palaces. They travelled around on barges that had curtains, net curtains around them, and if they were carried anywhere, there would be curtains around them, and people would have to get on the floor on their hands and knees and lower their head to the ground. So no one was allowed to stare at the king. So they couldn't question if he had golden flesh or not. His fourth name is his throne name. Now in Egypt they believed in magic. They believed that if you knew someone's real name, then you could cast a spell against them. So when kings came to the throne, the first thing they did was they chose a throne name, the name that the people of Egypt would call them by. So in the case of Tutankhamun, he was never known as that. He was known as Neb-Kaparu-Ra. That was his throne name. His real name, Tutankhamun, was his real name. Only his personal family, his closest inner circle would know his real name. So those were the 5 names of the king. So we have the Horus, the Neb-Tawi, the Lord of Two Lands, the Golden Horus, the throne name which the people would know him by, and his real name, his secret name, which only his inner circle would have. So there's the king at the top of the tree. Next to him are his wives. So he's got his chief wife, the one who hopefully will give him lots of heirs to the throne. And then he's got his second and third, sometimes even a fourth wife. These are his sisters. As soon as the king came to the throne, he married his sisters. He married his sisters so that overseas powers, such as the Hittites, the Greeks, etc., the Semitics, couldn't ask for him to send one of his sisters for them to marry. You didn't want anyone being directly related to any kings of Egypt to have a claim on the throne of Egypt. So king married his sisters and he popped them off into the harem. And in the harem are his other ladies, the ladies of the harem, the ones who are going to pleasure him when his wife is carrying the heir to the throne and that sort of thing. So that's the king and his wives. Now, in the early days of the ancient Egyptian civilization, kings appointed two powerful viziers, one to rule Lower Egypt and one to rule Upper Egypt. These roles usually went to the king's brothers, his closest brothers, the ones that he trusted the most. They were very powerful people and they would govern half of Egypt at each time. Then under the viziers come the overseers. The overseers are people in charge of projects. So it could be building the king's mansion of eternity. Now, a mansion of eternity could be a pyramid, it could be a tomb, all depending on what the king chose during that particular time of the chronology, the history, the timeline of ancient Egypt. What we call the Old Kingdom, they were building pyramids for the king, his mansions of eternity. In the Middle Kingdom, they still kept building pyramids, but not out of lots of stone, lots of mud bricks were involved. And then in what we call the New Kingdom, they were building tombs for the kings. They were all mansions of eternity, and an overseer would be appointed to oversee that project. Other projects could be building part of a temple on behalf of the king. The early cult temples in Egypt were all made out of mud bricks. So the priesthoods of each of these cults would call upon the king, ask him as a benefactor to add to their temples. So an overseer would be appointed to oversee those projects. Or it could be an agricultural landscape. During the Middle Kingdom kings were very interested in bringing the flood under control in Aswan and extending various canal systems throughout Egypt. So overseers would have been appointed for those jobs. Now, for the major towns and cities, you'd have the mayor of the city, the one who was given the responsibility of governing the people on the local level. These would usually be the king's cousins. So you've got his brothers, who are the viziers and the overseers, and then his cousins, who are the mayors in the town. So very early on, kings chose relatives that they could trust to govern in their name. Underneath them were the stewards. So the stewards would be the bureaucracy of the towns and the cities. And then under them came the scribes. Now, in our culture, we regard writing, academics as being very important. The scribes did have a skill of recording, of reading and writing hieroglyphs, and also the shorthand cursive script as well, which was used for everyday government. They had to go to a temple at the age of 8 or 9, and they would study for around about 6 or 7 years under very brutal conditions. The priest thought that the best way of training a scribe was to beat him. The more beatings he got for mistakes, the quicker he would learn not to make mistakes. So you can see that these were not well-adjusted people who were going around collecting taxes on behalf of the stewards and the mayors in the cities. They always had a gang of bully boys with them. If you didn't pay your taxes, you got a beating, and then you'd have to pay your taxes even after the beating. So that is the rough idea of the king and his government. Now, there was no monetary coinage used in Egypt. The gold was only used for religious purposes. Because the gods were supposed to have flesh made out of gold, you wouldn't soil that material by making it into money. Silver coins were introduced during the Greek period. So what did the Egyptians use during their time when they were ruling their own country. Well, they had a barter system, all based on produce: wheat, barley, animals, ducks, geese, bundles of wood, measures of linen. The advantage of this is that you cannot store those goods. They have to be used, which meant that nobody could build up real vast powerhouses against the king of Egypt. He controlled everything. He would collect his taxes every year through the scribe and steward and mayor system, and then he would give gifts to people who worked in his service. So the gifts were given. This is the gift from the king for your family: oil, wheat, barley, etc. What a clever idea. No one got paid, they received a gift, a thank you for your service. Now again, I will be doing a video on the myth of Osiris, but the one thing that you should remember, that the king of Egypt had the legal right to rule Egypt, and under that legal precedence he owned everything. He owned all the land, all the flora and the fauna, even the chattels, the people of Egypt themselves. So that's a general introduction on king and government. I hope it's been informative, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye for now.